He gave his lunch away and changed a life without knowing. The moment I remember most clearly is not the big ones. It is not my wedding day. It is not the morning my daughter was born. It is not even the afternoon my mother died and I held her hand and watched the light leave her eyes. The moment I remember most clearly is a Tuesday in October. I was 12 years old, and I gave away my lunch. I did not think about it. I did not weigh it. I did not do it because I was taught to or because someone was watching. I did it because of something I saw in another boy's face, something I did not have a word for back then, but that I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand. What I did not know, what I could not have known standing in that cafeteria in the fall of 1987 in a small town in western Pennsylvania that most maps did not even bother to name correctly, was that the boy sitting across from me at that table would go on to do something that changed the world, and that the lunch I slid across that table without a word, without expecting anything in return, was the hinge on which everything turned. I did not understand it at the time, not even close, but I am getting ahead of myself, because before you can understand what that Tuesday meant, you have to understand what my life looked like in the months before it, and you have to understand the town, and most of all you have to understand my father. My father's name was Gerald. Everyone called him Jerry except my grandmother, who called him Gerald, because she said she had not spent 9 hours in labor for her son to be called something. That sounded like a cartoon mouse. He was a big man, not tall, but wide through the shoulders the way men get when they have spent 20 years lifting things. He worked at a steel fabrication plant 40 minutes from our house. He got up at 4:30 every morning, and he did not complain about it. He ate the same breakfast every day. 2 eggs, toast, black coffee. He left the house before the sun was fully up, and he came home at 6 in the evening, smelling like metal shavings and industrial soap. He was not a tender man in the way that word gets used now. He did not say I love you easily. He did not offer hugs without a reason. But every Sunday he made pancakes for me and my younger sister Claire, and he let us pour as much syrup as we wanted, and he would sit there with his coffee and watch us eat. And there was something in his face during those mornings that I have never been able to name precisely. Contentment maybe, or relief. The relief of a man who has worked hard all week and arrived for a moment at the reason. We were not poor. We were not rich either. We lived in that particular American middle space where things were fine until they were not, where the car got replaced when it died rather than before, where back to school shopping happened at a discount store and you got 3 pairs of jeans, and that was your lot. My mother Patricia supplemented my father's income by taking alterations work from a dry cleaner in town. She was good with her hands. Precise. Patient. She would sit at the dining room table in the evenings with fabric spread out around her, and her reading glasses on, and her little tape measure round her neck, and she would hum to herself while she worked, always the same few bars of a song I later identified as an old Patsy Cline tune, though she claimed she did not even know she was doing it. It was in most ways a quiet life, not unhappy, just quiet. And then the fall of 1987 arrived, and quietly, without announcement, things began to crack. The plant had been struggling. This was something I understood only in pieces, in fragments of conversation I caught between my parents after I was supposed to be asleep, in the way my father's jaw tightened when he read the mail, in the fact that the Sunday pancakes started happening every other week instead of every week, and then less than that. I was 12, which is old enough to know something is wrong, but not old enough to understand the machinery of how things go wrong. I knew only that there was a heaviness in the house that had not been there before, a waiting feeling, like the air before a thunderstorm. In September of that year, the plant announced layoffs. My father was not among the first wave. He came home the evening of the announcement, and he sat at the kitchen table, and my mother put a plate in front of him, and he ate without speaking for a long time. And then he said, quiet and measured the way he said everything. Some of the boys got their notices today. My mother said, but not you. He said, not yet. I heard this from the hallway where I was sitting against the wall pretending to read, and those 2 words planted themselves in my chest like a splitter. Small, almost invisible, but there. School had started 3 weeks earlier. I was in 7th grade at Millview Middle School, which was the kind of school that had been built in the 1960s with a certain optimism about the future of public education and had since settled into a dignified shabbiness. Linoleum floors scuffed to a shine by 40 years of sneakers. Hallways that smelled like floor wax and cafeteria food, and the particular blended odor of several hundred children who were all in various ways trying to figure out who they were. I was not a particularly remarkable 7th grader. I was middling at sports, decent at English, stronger at math. I had two close friends, a boy named Danny Kowalski who collected baseball cards with a seriousness that bordered on religious, and a girl named Sarah Pratt who had read more books than anyone I had ever met, and had a laugh like a door hinge, sudden and a little rusty, which made everyone around her laugh too. These were my people. This was my world. And then one morning in late September a new boy arrived. His name, we were told by our homeroom teacher, Mrs. Albright, was Marcus Webb. He had come from somewhere in Ohio, she said, and she asked us to make him feel welcome. She said it the way teachers say things like that, meaning it probably, but also saying it because it was the thing to say. Because the instruction had been given enough times, it had worn a smooth groove in the routine of the day. Make him feel welcome. We nodded. We looked at Marcus Webb. He was sitting in the second row, third seat from the window. He was thin. Not the thin of a kid who runs a lot, but a different kind of thin. An angular quality to his face and wrists that suggested something more fundamental. He was wearing a blue flannel shirt that was slightly too short in the sleeves and jeans that had been hemmed rather than bought at the right length. His sneakers were clean but old. His hair needed cutting. None of this would have meant much to me except that I grew up in a household where my mother noticed things like hemmed jeans. She had an eye for the small adjustments people made to keep things looking presentable. She would have looked at Marcus Webb's jeans and known exactly what they meant. I looked at him and knew without knowing how I knew that things at Marcus Webb's house were harder than things at my house. And at my house things were already getting harder. He did not speak in homeroom. He answered when Mrs. Albright called his name. Quiet but clear. He looked at the desk when he was not required to look elsewhere. He had a stillness about him that I would not have been able to articulate at 12, but that I recognize now as the learned stillness of a child who has decided that being invisible is safer than being seen. I did not talk to him that first day. I did not talk to him the second day either. He seemed to want the invisibility, and I respected it in the unconscious way that children sometimes extend to each other the courtesies they cannot name. But I watched him. What I did not know was that Marcus Webb had moved to Millview because his father had found work at the same plant where my father worked. His father's name was Raymond. He had been laid off from a factory in Ohio and had heard through some network of working men, the kind that operates on phone calls and handshakes and the quiet passing of information between people who understand what it means to need a job, that the Pennsylvania plant was still hiring. He had packed up his family and driven them to Millview in a truck with a transmission that needed replacing, and they were living in a rented house on Durkin Street, which was the part of town where the houses were cheapest. I did not learn any of this until much later. I am telling you now because I want you to understand the invisible architecture of that October. The weight of families, mine and Marcus's, were balanced on the same uncertain edge without knowing it. The way the steel plant's troubles were threading themselves through the lives of people who had never met. October arrived gray and cold the way Pennsylvania Octobers do, with a smell like wet leaves and wood smoke and something mineral in the air that meant the first frost was coming. My father had received his notice the last week of September. He came home with it in his shirt pocket. An actual piece of paper, the way things were still done then. He set it on the kitchen table and sat down across from my mother, and they talked for 2 hours after they thought Claire and I were asleep. I was not asleep. I sat in the hallway again in the dark listening to my parents discuss the specific arithmetic of catastrophe, how long the savings would last, whether my mother could take more alteration work, whether my father's brother in Pittsburgh might know of something. My mother cried once briefly and then stopped. My father said, "We are going to be all right, Trish." He said it 3 times different each time. The first time it sounded like reassurance. The second time it sounded like a question. The third time it sounded like a prayer. I went back to bed and lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. and felt the specific loneliness of being 12 and knowing that something is happening that is beyond your ability to fix or even fully understand. In the morning, my mother made my lunch as she always did. A sandwich, an apple, a small bag of chips, a cookie wrapped in wax paper because she said plastic wrap did not keep them as fresh. She packed it in the brown bag I brought home and reused each day. She tucked a note in the bag, the way she sometimes did when she knew I was worried about something, though she never directly addressed the worry. She would write something small and sideways, a joke, a quote she had read somewhere. Once just the word Tuesday with 3 question marks after it, which made no sense to me at all, but made me smile anyway, which I think was the point. That morning the note said, "Rough seas make good sailors. Love, Mom." I folded it and put it in my pocket. I carried it there all day. The cafeteria at Millview Middle School had long folding tables with attached bench seats, the kind that were bolted into a single unwieldy unit, so that sitting down required a sort of sideways shimmy that everyone had long since automated. Most of us brought lunches from home, which meant the cafeteria was really less about food and more about the complex social cartography of who sat where and with whom, which in middle school is a matter of life and death significance, or feels like it. Danny and Sarah and I had our table, 4th from the right, 2nd row. We had occupied it since 6th grade with the territorial certainty of creatures who have found their habitat. On the first Tuesday of October, Marcus Webb sat alone. He was at the far end of one of the middle tables, the territory that belonged to no particular group, which meant it was the territory of people who had no group yet. He had his lunch with him. Not a bag, but a metal lunchbox, the old kind with a clasp, the kind my father had carried when I was very small. It was dented. It had a faded image on the side that might once have been a cartoon character, but had worn past identification. He opened it. He looked inside it for a moment. Then he closed it. He sat with his hands flat on the table on either side of the closed lunchbox, and he looked out the window at the gray October sky, and his face was very still, and I understood. I understood because I was 12 and had not yet learned the many ways adults learn to not understand what they are seeing. I understood because my mother had an eye for hem jeans, and I had inherited something of that eye. I understood because in the previous 2 weeks I had listened to my parents talk about how long the savings would last, and I knew what it felt like to sit with a thing that was supposed to contain something and to open it and find it wanting. He opened that lunchbox, and it was empty, or nearly so. I did not know which. I only knew what his face looked like when he closed it. I sat with Danny and Sarah, and I looked down at my lunch, sandwich, apple, chips, cookie, and wax paper, a note from my mother about rough seas and good sailors. Danny was talking about something, a trade he was considering for his card collection, a Mickey mantle he had found at a garage sale that he thought might be valuable. Sarah was reading the back of her milk carton the way she always did, reading everything within reach the way some people breathe. The cafeteria was loud around us, all those young voices bouncing off linoleum and cinder block. I picked up my bag. I stood up. Danny said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I will be back." I walked across the cafeteria to the middle tables. I sat down across from Marcus Webb. He looked at me the way you look at something unexpected, not startled exactly, but alert, waiting to see what the thing was going to do. I put my lunch bag on the table between us. I pushed it toward him. He looked at the bag. He looked at me. I did not say anything because I could not think of what to say that would not make it worse. If I said I thought you might be hungry, I would be naming the thing he was working to keep unnamed. If I said take it, I would be making it about my generosity, and it was not about that. It was not about anything I could have articulated. It was just that there was a bag of food, and there was a boy who had opened his lunchbox and closed it again without eating anything, and the space between those 2 facts seemed like a space I could do something about. So I just put the bag on the table and pushed it toward him and said nothing. For a long moment Marcus Webb said nothing either. He looked at the bag. He looked at the window. Something moved across his face. I have spent years trying to name it. It was not quite embarrassment. It was not quite relief. It was something closer to the feeling you get when something you have been very carefully holding finally gets held by someone else for just a second. A moment of being seen. He did not say thank you. He opened the bag and he ate. I sat with him while he ate. I did not go back to my table. After a minute, Danny and Sarah drifted over with their trays. Not because I asked them to, but because that is the thing about a 12-year-old who reads everything and a 12-year-old who cares deeply about Mickey Mantle. They are not at the bottom of it bad people. They came and sat down without making a thing of it. And Danny started talking again about the card trade and Sarah started telling Marcus about a book she was reading, and Marcus ate my lunch and nodded occasionally and did not say much, and that was that. That was all it was. I almost forgot about it by the time I got home. Or so I thought. What I did not know was that Marcus Webb walked home from school that afternoon and told his mother about the boy who had given him his lunch. His mother's name was Dolores. She was working 2 jobs at the time, daytime shifts at a diner and evening shifts cleaning offices downtown. She would not have been home when Marcus arrived, but Marcus told me years later that he sat at the kitchen table and he wrote it down. In a notebook he kept, he wrote it down. A boy named Daniel gave me his lunch today and did not say why. He got my name wrong. He thought it was Daniel not because I had told him my name was Daniel, but because he had heard Danny talking and assumed. I did not learn this until much later, and by then it was funny in the way that only things that have become old and important can be funny. He wrote it down because he told me it was the first kind thing that had happened to him since they had moved to Millview, and he wanted to keep it. He was 11 years old, and he was keeping a record of kind things, the way some people keep records of grievances, because he needed the evidence. He needed to be able to go back and look and say this happened. This was real. But I did not know any of that on that first Tuesday of October 1987. I walked home and my mother asked about school, and I said fine. I ate dinner. I did homework. I went to bed. My father received his formal separation paperwork the next day. The weeks that followed were the hardest our family had known up to that point. My father began looking for work, in person by mail through the same kind of working man networks that had brought Marcus's father to Millview in the first place. My mother took on more alteration work. The Sunday pancakes stopped entirely. Claire, who was 8 and more perceptive than most adults, gave her credit for started being very quiet and very good in the way children do when they understand that the household is fragile and they are trying not to add weight to it. I ate lunch at school most days without a full bag. My mother still made what she could, usually just a sandwich and an apple. No chips, no cookie. The notes continued though. She never stopped putting notes in the bag. One of them during this period just said, "Still here, still yours, love Mom." I carried that one for weeks before it fell apart in my pocket. Marcus and I had become by default lunch companions. We never formalized it. There was no moment where we decided to be friends. He simply stopped sitting at the empty end of the middle table and started sitting with Danny and Sarah and me at the 4th table from the right 2nd row. He brought his lunchbox most days. Sometimes it had something in it. Sometimes it did not. I never asked. We ate whatever we had, and we talked about whatever we talked about, which was the things that 12-year-olds talk about when they are discovering that the world is more complicated than they were initially told. Marcus, I learned, was smart, not in the way that gets noticed immediately. He did not wave his hand in class or correct teachers or perform intelligence for the room. His was the quieter kind, the kind that watched and processed and returned things, changed, refined, clarified. He asked questions that seemed simple until you tried to answer them, and then discovered the question had a floor you had not known was there. He was interested in everything genuinely, without the self-consciousness that usually accompanies that kind of breadth at 12. He read science books not for school, but for the pleasure of knowing how things worked. He had opinions about history that surprised his teachers. He could fix small mechanical things with an intuition that seemed less learned than innate. His father was still at the plant in November. My father had found part-time work at a hardware store 20 miles away. Not what he needed, but something. The quality of the house began to shift again, slowly from catastrophe imminent to merely difficult. My father came home from the hardware store smelling different, varnish and sawdust instead of metal shavings, and something in him seemed, if not happier, at least less heavy. He was not a man who needed to be doing a particular thing so much as a man who needed to be doing something. Christmas that year was spare. Claire and I each got one meaningful present and several small ones. Mine was a second-hand telescope that my father had repaired in the garage over the preceding weeks, replacing the cracked eyepiece and repainting the barrel so that it looked almost new. I did not know he had done this until I opened it. I spent most of Christmas night on the back porch in the cold trying to find Jupiter, which Danny had told me was visible that time of year, and I found it eventually. A small bright point slightly south of where I had expected, and I felt something that I only understand now as wonder. The specific wonder of a 12-year-old realizing that the universe is large and that you are in it. Marcus's family did not have Christmas that year. He told me this in January flat and without drama the way he told most things. I did not know what to say. I said I was sorry. He said it was fine. He said his mother had cried once, but that she thought he did not see, and he pretended he had not. I thought about my own mother crying in the kitchen in September, and my father saying we are going to be all right, and I felt something that might have been the first real understanding I ever had of the word solidarity. The knowledge that you are not alone in the specific country of your difficulty, that others live there too, that the country has neighbors. January, February. The cold in Pennsylvania is a serious thing. It is not decorative. It presses in from all sides, and it gets into the bones, and it makes the evenings come early and stay long. I remember that winter as a gray thing, a slow thing, and also, though this seems contradictory, as a time when something was quietly growing in me that I did not have a name for. Marcus and I had fallen into a pattern of walking home together on days when his mother or father did not have the car. We lived in different directions, so there was a stretch of 4 or 5 blocks where our paths overlapped, and we would walk those blocks and talk, and then I would peel off toward my house, and he would continue toward Durkin Street, and we would do the small acknowledgement that boys did. Then, a half wave, a nod. Nothing that could be accused of being too much. It was on one of those walks in February that Marcus told me about the notebook. He told me he kept a notebook of things he wanted to remember. Good things mostly. Things that had helped him. He said he had started it when they left Ohio because there was not much to hold on to, and he needed to be able to look at evidence of the world being more than hard. He said the first thing he had written in the Millview section was about me giving him my lunch. I did not know what to do with this information. At 12, the knowledge that you occupy a page in someone else's private record of goodness is not something you know how to metabolize. I said something awkward, I am sure. He did not make it worse by dwelling on it. He said it as if it was a fact about the world, like the location of Jupiter. We walked in silence for a minute. He said, "Why did you do it, that day?" "I thought about this," I said. "I do not know. I just saw your face when you opened the box." He nodded. We walked. Nobody had done anything like that before. He said, "Not here," I said. "I am sorry," he said. "Do not be. I am just telling you." He peeled off onto his street. I walked the rest of the way home thinking about a boy who needed to write things down, to believe that kindness was real, and felt something in my chest that was specific and uncomfortable in a way I now recognize as the discomfort of seeing something clearly. Spring came. Things at my father's job situation improved. He was brought back to the plant in a reduced capacity, which was not what it had been, but was enough. The pancakes came back on Sundays. Claire relaxed imperceptibly, but visibly the way a kite relaxes when the tension on the string eases. My mother stopped humming quite so intently over her alterations. Marcus's father was promoted to a different position at the plant, not dramatically, not life-changingly, but enough that the family moved from Durkin Street to a slightly different house on Clement Avenue, which had a small yard in the back and a bedroom that Marcus did not have to share with his younger cousin who had been staying with them for several months. We finished 7th grade. We finished 8th grade. I barely saw Marcus over summers because I worked part-time helping my neighbor with his lawn service, and Marcus worked for a grocery store on weekends bagging and stocking. We were two boys being slowly converted by circumstance into 2 young men, and the process was involving things other than each other. High school happened the way things happen when you are too busy living through them to understand what they mean. I remember it in fragments, and the way memory keeps things it decides are important and releases everything else. Sarah Pratt winning the regional debate championship and crying in a way that made all of us cry. Danny Kowalski's father buying the card collection for $800, which was real money, which meant they got the garage roof fixed. My sister Claire developing an interest in drawing that surprised all of us. She had been so quiet for so long that we had not expected somehow that she would announce herself to the world through something as particular and strong as a talent. And Marcus was in high school, what I could only see in retrospect he had always been becoming. He was exceptional in ways that started getting noticed, not by us. We had always known he was exceptional the way you know things about people. You have walked home with in the cold, but by teachers, by a guidance counselor named Mr. Hartwell, who pulled Marcus aside in his junior year and said something to him that Marcus later told me had changed everything. Hartwell had said, "You should be thinking about college." Marcus had said, "We do not have money for college." Hartwell had said, "You should not let that stop you from thinking about it." And Marcus had thought about it. He thought about it the way he thought about things, methodically, thoroughly, with that particular intelligence that took a thing apart and put it back together and understood it from the inside. He researched scholarships. He researched financial aid. He did this over weeks and months quietly, without telling most people, filling the notebook that had started in 7th grade with new kinds of evidence, not just kindnesses but possibilities, pages of information about schools and programs and pathways. He applied to 7 schools. He was accepted to 4. He received a full scholarship to 1. The one he chose was an engineering program at a university 300 miles away, which might as well have been another country for how it felt to those of us standing at the edge of it. Graduation was a June afternoon of yellow and green, and we all wore gowns that made us look like pieces of a procession in some ceremony whose meaning we were just beginning to understand. Marcus spoke at graduation, not the valedictorian speech, something else, a kind of open reflection that our principal had asked him to write because Marcus had been selected for an award for service and community involvement. He stood at the podium and he looked out at all of us and he said something that I have remembered verbatim for 37 years. He said, "I want to say something about small things. We talk a lot about big things, big achievements, big plans, big futures. But I think the thing that changed my life was not big. It was a lunch, a brown paper bag on a cafeteria table. I do not think the person who gave it to me even remembers doing it. I felt the skin on my arms go tight." He said, "That person will probably never know what it meant." And I think that is true of a lot of us. We do things and we do not know what they mean. We offer something and we do not see where it lands. But I want to say for anyone who is listening, it lands somewhere. It always lands somewhere. He stepped back from the podium. People applauded. My mother sitting beside me reached over and took my hand without looking at me. I let her. He did not mention my name. He did not look at me. I do not know if he was talking about me specifically or if the memory had generalized to become symbol rather than specific moment. I did not ask. That was the last time I saw Marcus Webb for a long time. Or so I thought. Life. The word sounds too small for what it is. We went forward into it. All of us. Marcus to his engineering program. Danny to a business degree he never used and a love of antiques he never expected. Sarah to a journalism career that eventually took her to places that made the Millview Debate Championship look like a practice run. Claire to art school. Me to a degree in education which surprised no one once I had done it and had surprised me before. I became a teacher. 7th grade eventually after some years of uncertainty about what grade. It seemed right, though I would not have been able to say why except in the language of things you feel before you understand them. I taught at Millview Middle School, which was either poetic or predictable depending on your perspective. In the same building where I had gone to school, the same linoleum floors now rescuffed by a different generation of sneakers. I had a classroom with 2 windows and a smart board that was smarter than I was for the first 3 years I had it. I decorated the walls with quotes that I thought were good. Things about curiosity and effort and the relationship between trying and becoming. I had at various points hundreds of students. I got to know many of them. Some of them I think about still. Can picture their faces and their particular ways of being 12. A boy who had memorized every NFL quarterback since 1970. A girl who ate her lunch in the library every day by choice and was the happiest person in the building. A set of twins who communicated in a private shorthand that no one had ever successfully decoded. And every year in October I looked at the cafeteria from the doorway during my lunch supervision rotation, and I thought about a boy opening a metal lunchbox and closing it. I thought about this more than I thought about most things from childhood. I do not know why the image stayed so sharp when so much else had softened. I suppose some things choose you rather than the other way around. Marcus and I had lost touch in the specific way of people who moved to different cities. Before the internet made it easy to not lose touch, a phone number I had for him stopped working after his second year of college. Danny thought he had heard Marcus had gone to work for some company in the Midwest somewhere. Sarah, by then a journalist, said she had tried to find him once for a piece. She was writing about scholarship recipients and could not locate him. He had, it seemed, moved into a life that our small network could not see into. I told myself this was fine. It was fine. People live their lives and the threads that connected you thin, and eventually you stop pulling on them. This is not loss exactly. It is just the texture of time. Years later I would understand that I was wrong, that I had been pulling on the thread all along, and so had he. I am going to tell you now about a day in April 23 years after the cafeteria. 23 years after the brown paper bag on that table. I need you to understand the distance of that. Not in miles, though the miles were real, but in the measure of a life. 23 years is Claire's children being born. 23 years is my father's death from a heart attack when he was 61. And my mother's move to a smaller house and the Sunday pancakes happening at her new kitchen table instead. 23 years is 3 different cars. 23 years is to relationships that did not work out and one that did slowly. And surprisingly with a woman named Ellen who had moved to Millview to care for her mother and stayed because, as she said, she could not figure out a good reason to leave. 23 years is a lot of Tuesdays. I was in my classroom on an April afternoon in 2010 and I was grading papers, the particular species of 7th grade essay, in which young people are asked to explain the most important lesson they have learned and reliably produce a document that is both touching and in its grammar terrifying. When there was a knock at my door, I said, "Come in." The door opened. A woman came in, probably in her late 30s, in a professional jacket, and the particular composed expression of someone who has arranged their face for a meeting. She said she was looking for the school administrator to discuss a proposed program, something about a grant, a STEM education initiative. She was representing an organization. I said I was just a teacher, but I could take her to the main office. She said that would be wonderful. As we walked down the hallway, she asked me how long I had taught there, and I told her. And she said that was a long time, and I said yes. She asked what grade, and I said 7th, and she said that was interesting timing actually, because the man she was here with, the director of the organization, had gone to school here himself. 7th grade. She thought it was funny, the coincidence of it. I stopped walking. I said, "What organization?" She told me the name. I had seen it in a newspaper. It was a non-profit focused on STEM education in under-resourced schools. It had been founded 7 years earlier and had become by 2010 something that people were paying attention to. It had placed engineers and scientists in mentoring roles in hundreds of schools. It had a fellowship program. It had changed the trajectories of a number of young people in ways that were concrete and documented. I said, "What is the director's name?" She said, "Marcus Webb." I am going to be honest about what happened next, because I think honesty is the only thing that serves this kind of story. I stood in the hallway of Millview Middle School, and I felt something happen in my body that I have never experienced before or since. A sort of vertical rearrangement, as if something had shifted inside me 1 centimeter in the direction of the spine. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just that 1 centimeter, and the knowledge that something I had not known I was waiting for had arrived. I said to the woman, "I knew Marcus Webb when we were kids." She looked at me differently then. She said, "You went to school here at the same time," I said. "He moved here in 7th grade. I sat across from him in the cafeteria." she said. I will tell him, I said. That would be good. I took her to the main office. I went back to my classroom. I sat down at my desk. I did not grade any more papers. 20 minutes later, my door opened again and Marcus Webb was standing in it. 35 years is a long time, and also no time at all. He was taller than I remembered, though of course I had been 12 the last time. He was wearing a good jacket, something professional, the kind of jacket that a person wears when they have arrived at a certain stage of being taken seriously. His hair was close cropped. He had gray at his temples. He was smiling in a way that was complicated, something between disbelief and recognition and something else. Some third thing I did not have a name for yet. He looked at me. He said, Daniel. I said, it is James. He stopped. He laughed, a real laugh, full and sudden. He said, I called you Daniel for years. In the notebook. Every time I wrote about you. Daniel. I said, I know. You told me at one point. I thought it was funny. He said, it is not funny, I said. It is a little funny. He stood in my doorway, and we looked at each other across whatever it is that separates 12 from 47. I said, come in. He came in. He sat in the chair I kept by my desk for parent conferences and student check-ins. I sat in my chair. The April afternoon light was doing something particular through the window, softening the way light does in the hour before it starts to dim, so that everything in the room had a warmth to it that felt somehow appropriate. He told me what had happened, what the lunch had meant, not in dramatic terms. Marcus Webb was not a dramatic man in his telling, though his life had dramatic things in it. He said it quietly and with precision, the way he had always told things, taking them apart and putting them back together so you understood them from the inside. He said that October had been the worst month of his life to that point, that his father had been about to be laid off, had in fact been laid off the week after that Tuesday in the cafeteria, that they had gone from spare to genuinely desperate for several months that autumn, and that Marcus had started going to school without eating because there was not enough, and he was older than his sister, and it seemed to him at 11 that the right logic was to give the food to her. He had been sitting in the cafeteria that Tuesday, not having eaten since the evening before. He had told no one this. He was working very hard to ensure that no one knew it, because there is a particular shame that attaches to that kind of lack when you are 11 and trying to be invisible. And the shame is a second hunger on top of the first. He said when I put the bag on the table, he had understood immediately that I knew that I was not offering out of social performance or to feel good about myself. He said he knew because I did not make a production of it. He said he knew because I said nothing and sat with him while he ate and did not make him feel like a charity. He said, I have thought about the difference between pity and kindness my whole adult life. Pity makes itself the center. Kindness does not need to be seen. I said I had not thought about it that way. He said, you were 12. You probably were not thinking about it at all, I said. I really was not. He smiled again. That complicated smile. He said, that is exactly the point. He told me about the notebook. He still had it, the original one, the Millview section. He had the entry from that Tuesday. A boy named Daniel gave me his lunch today and did not say why. He said he had read that entry on more than one occasion when things were hard. He said in college, during a period when his scholarship was nearly revoked due to a bureaucratic error, and he was facing the possibility of losing everything he had worked, for he had read it in his dorm room at 1 a.m, and it had not solved the problem, but it had given him something to hold on to. Evidence, he called it. Evidence that the world was not only hard. He said, I built the foundation of this organization on that idea, that small things land, that you do not always see where they land, but they do. I thought about the graduation speech, about it always lands somewhere. I said, at graduation, that speech, were you talking about me? He looked at me steadily. He said, yes. He said, I thought you knew. I said, I thought you might have forgotten the specific person. Turned it into symbol. He said, I tried to find you a few times. Your old number did not work. I said, I know. He said, and then I came back here, on purpose. The grant, the program, those are real. We genuinely want to establish a presence in this district. But I asked my assistant to make sure we came to this school specifically. I wanted to see it again. I thought maybe He stopped. I waited. He said, I thought maybe you were still here. Teaching. It seemed like the kind of thing you would do. I said. Why? He said, because you saw what was in a lunchbox and you did something about it. People who see that way become teachers. They become people who stay in places and make those places better. I felt the thing in my chest again. The same one from the graduation. From the February walk home. The afternoon sunlight through the cafeteria window. I did not say anything. He did not say anything. We sat in the particular quiet of a classroom in April. Two middle-aged men who had once been boys on either side of a table. And the quiet was full of everything that words would not have improved. He was in Millview for 3 days. We had dinner that evening, and the next evening, and I introduced him to Ellen, who within 20 minutes was asking him questions he clearly had not expected from someone's wife who had known him for 20 minutes. She had always been that way. She had a quality that made people show her their most interesting aspects, as if her attention was a kind of permission. He told me things I had not known. He told me that his father had died when Marcus was 26. A car accident. Winter roads. Outside a town in Indiana where Raymond Webb had been working another job that another network of working men had found for him. He said his mother was still alive, still in Ohio now, and that she knew about the lunch. Had always known, because he had told her that same Tuesday afternoon coming home from school. He said she had prayed for my family by name in the way Dolores Webb prayed for things, which was seriously and consistently, and with the implication that she expected God to be paying attention. I found this extraordinary. That for 37 years a woman I had never met had prayed for my family by a name. That was not even my correct name. He told me about the organization, how it had started, who it had helped, the specific kids he could point to and say that one. He told me about a young woman named Priya in Cleveland, who had been heading in a dangerous direction at 13, and who was now a chemical engineer at a research hospital. He told me about a boy in Philadelphia named Terrence, who had been Marcus's mentee for years, and who had received his PhD the previous spring. He said, every one of them has a page in a notebook. Not literally, but you know what I mean. I said I did. He said, you started something, James. You started something and you did not know it, and it branched and branched and branched. I thought about my father coming home with his layoff notice in his shirt pocket. I thought about my mother's notes in my lunch bag. Rough seas make good sailors. I thought about the telescope that Christmas, my father's hands making it new again in the garage. I thought about standing at my classroom door every October watching the cafeteria and thinking about a boy with a metal lunchbox. I said, my mother always put notes in my lunch. I do not know if she knew she was doing something that mattered. He said, she probably did not. That is the thing about it. The thing about what I said. He said, goodness does not need to know its own importance. It just needs to happen. One have been a teacher for 29 years. I have taught by my own rough count approximately 850 students. Many of them I have tracked as best I can. A few have stayed in my life. Most have become names and faces I encounter occasionally on social media or at the grocery store or at the rare reunion. Some of them I wonder about. Some of them I know went on to do extraordinary things. And some of them went on to do ordinary things which are also extraordinary. If you know where to look. I do not know how many of them needed something I gave them without knowing it mattered. I do not know how many lunches I have given away metaphorically. How many moments of seeing someone and responding to what I saw. How many small acknowledgments of dignity. How many notes tucked into conversations that did what my mother's notes did, which was simply to say, I see you. You are not alone. Rough seas make good sailors. I do not know which of those moments will branch, but Marcus taught me that they do. He taught me that the architecture of a life is built from moments so small, they do not announce themselves, that the things we are most proud of may not be the things we knew we were doing, that kindness does not require intention to have impact, it only requires the act. After those 3 days, Marcus left Millview and went back to his organization and his life, and we have stayed in contact ever since, not constantly, not in the way of people who see each other often, but in the way of people who know where to find each other. He comes back to Millview every couple of years. His organization established a program in the school district. There are students in Millview today right now who are being mentored and encouraged and seen because of a partnership that traces itself through many branches back to a Tuesday in October, and a boy who opened his lunchbox and closed it. I think about my father, about the way he came home smelling like metal shavings and sat at the kitchen table and ate in silence and then made pancakes on Sundays, about how he never told me to be kind. He just was, in the particular way of quiet men who perform their values without announcing them, about the telescope he made new again with his hands in the garage at Christmas so that his son could find Jupiter. I think about my mother, about her hand on mine at the graduation, about 37 years of notes in lunch bags, about how she cried once briefly in the kitchen and then stopped and kept going. I think about a woman named Dolores Webb who I have never met who prayed for my family by a wrong name for 37 years. I think about Danny Kowalski finding a Mickey Mantle card at a garage sale, about Sarah Pratt reading the back of her milk carton, about the way both of them moved over to Marcus's table without being asked, because they were not at the bottom of it bad people. I think about a boy named Marcus Webb sitting at the end of a long table in a Pennsylvania cafeteria in October, opening a metal lunchbox and closing it. And I think about the fact that I will never fully know what I set in motion on that Tuesday. I will never know all the names of the people whose lives touch the edges of that moment. I will never know how many branches there are, how far the thing spread, whether Priya in Cleveland or Terrence in Philadelphia have their own notebooks, their own Tuesday Octobers, their own moments of receiving something small from someone who did not know it mattered. I will never know all of it, and that might be the most important thing I have ever learned. You are doing things right now that you do not know matter. You are saying things to people that they will write down in notebooks you will never see. You are being seen in the ways that you need to be seen, and seeing others in the ways that they need to be seen, and some of those moments are touching off something that will travel further than you can follow. The world is built from Tuesdays. It is built from the small, unannounced, unwitnessed moments, when one person sees another person's need and does the quiet, simple thing. My father would have said in his spare way, "Do what is in front of you to do." I would add only this: you might not understand it at the time. You probably will not. The thing you give away without thinking about it, the moment you step toward someone without knowing why, that is the thing that lands somewhere always in the life of another person, in ways you cannot predict and may never know. And that is not a loss. That is the miracle. It is a Tuesday morning as I sit here writing this. Outside my window, the light has the particular October quality I have known all my life, the amber gray of a Pennsylvania morning in the fall. The smell of wet leaves if I open the window, which I have. The maple in the front yard is halfway through its turn, still half green, half the color of something burning gently. Ellen is downstairs making coffee. I can hear the particular sounds of that. The cabinet, the water, the particular domestic music of a life shared with someone you love. In a few hours I will drive to school. I will walk the hallways that smell like floor wax and cafeteria food, and several hundred young people who are all in various ways trying to figure out who they are. I will stand at my classroom door and watch the cafeteria during my supervision rotation. I will look for the boy at the end of the long table. I always do. And someday, not today maybe, but someday there will be a boy who opens his lunchbox and closes it. And there will be another boy or girl who sees, and they will do the thing, the small quiet thing, without knowing why, and it will land somewhere. It always does.